The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Dylan J. Schlender presiding. We all rise for the Honorable Judge Schlender.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of Zulu versus Gunga Din. Zulu is a 1964 war film about a company of British soldiers who stave off an assault by 4,000 Zulu warriors while held up in a field hospital. Gunga Din is a 1939 adventure film about three British sergeants who thwart the murderous Thuggy Colt with the help of the courageous water bearer. Now, in civil cases like this, the counsel appointed to represent each film will present their case for why their client is the superior movie. And ultimately, the jury will render its verdict as to which is, in fact, the better film. This decision will hereby stand in all rankings and listicles from now on until the end of time, ad infinitum. Professor Jeremy Black, you are here representing Zulu. You may present your opening argument.
Thank you very much. And with all due respect to the jury and to the judge, I want to argue my case, but also, without being difficult, I want to say this is a choice between two very good films. So this makes it more exciting for all of us. And also, I feel, and I am sure the Honourable the Honourable Pleader opposite shares this view, that whichever wins is a good outcome. All right?
Absolutely.
So
we agree.
Start.
Absolutely.
Now, we have two films, one in 1939, one in 1964. They are films of a moment in history, a moment that had confidence, certainly in 1939, in imperial purpose. And it is not our job today to decide on the rights or wrongs of that.
Thank God.
It may be the case that comments arise from us which reflect on that, but our prime purpose is to discuss the films. They are each excellent. If I have to argue particularly, and I will say more when it turns to my case, I would say that Zulu captures an immediacy, which is because of the focus on a day and a half, which I think is tremendously powerful, largely a single set, and with a small and fine group of actors. And there is a historical resonance about fundamental questions of masculinity, courage, perseverance, and purpose. And that makes it a film, although made in 1964 about an episode in 1879, it makes it a film that is relevant for all time.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Appearing on behalf of Gunga Din is Mr. Maynard Bangs. Please present your opening statement.
Your Honor, gentlemen of the jury, usually our good friend Jeremy joins us and we pit two films head to head, and he usually takes the old school and we get stuck defending the new school. But, this time I've done the last thing Jeremy ever expected.
You dastardly fellow.
I went old school. That's right. My client today was made in 1939, making it the oldest film we've yet discussed in this courtroom, and I believe only the second one in black and white. So, now the tables have turned, Jeremy.
They are.
This time you're the new school.
I am.
You're the young whippersnapper.
I am.
This time you're the impertinent kid on the bus with the cranked up boombox and the piercings all over his face, and I get to be the curmudgeonly old man shaking his fist at you to turn the blasted thing down and get a job. Get a job, Jeremy. Ooh, that feels good. Now, on to my client. The two films we are here to consider today both take place in relatively the same time period, Zulu in 1879 and Gunga Din in 1880, and they share a lot of common themes, what with British imperialism, bringing soldiers into very dangerous situations in far-off places, pitting them against local groups of resistance. But what I think will win the day for my client today is that Zulu is a historical war film, a drama, very much concerned where it can be with historical accuracy to a point. And Gunga Din is an adaptation of a poem and some short stories. It's fiction. Thus, its concern is entertainment. It's an adventure film. It wants to take you to these far-off places with some very lively, very likable blokes, I believe the expression is, and it is interested in telling you a story and less concerned with the story being believable. It prefers, in fact, to tell you one that is more fantastic. So I look forward to the discussion very much. Tally ho.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bangs. Jeremy, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Well, my first exhibit on Zulu is the quality of the immediacy, the fact I focused on earlier. This is one which, while not completely observing the unities, in other words, it does take a day and a half, whereas the film itself is, I think, 139 minutes, nevertheless gives you a sense of slow motion. There's a build-up on both sides, on the side of the garrison, not least the bridge building, and also on the side of the Zulus, not least the ritual dance. But once we move to the actual awareness in the garrison that they're about to be attacked, the pace increases, but while increasing, it nevertheless allows a definite air of suspense. And there's suspense all the way through. Now, I saw it when it came out in 1964. I hadn't seen it again till last night when I rented it because I thought it would be useful to remind myself of what I'd seen.
Good strategy.
A good strategy. Yeah, but I actually have got a good memory. I can, most of what I recalled from 64 was still pertinent. What I think is really striking when you watch it again is a sense of suspense, even though you know what is going to happen. And I think that is a characteristic of a really great film. So to give you an example, LA Confidential for me is a really great film, even though I've watched it more than once. I know that the hero is going to be shot dead by Smith. I know what is going to happen. It is still a brilliant film with suspense. Whereas the usual suspects, once you've seen it once, doesn't work the same way. You know what's going to happen. Somehow the suspense isn't there. Now in Zulu, you know what is going to happen, but there is a real sense of engagement with the garrison, partly because the characters and the interplay of the characters, I mean, in one sense, it's a classic bloke movie, as you said earlier, with the interesting interplay between the two protagonists, which I hope to talk about in my next piece of evidence. But also, more generally, you get interested in the range of characters and the variety of human experiences they present.
So, Jeremy, question from the bench. Was this range of human experience and characters, was that actually emblematic of the actual troops that were there for the actual historical event? Would you say that was a pretty good representation?
Yes, that's a fascinating question. There were one or two differences. There was actually, the regiment itself was more English at the point. It subsequently became more of a Welsh regiment. So there isn't quite the Welshness, and the Men of Harlech was not the regimental song at that point. But nevertheless, Hook was actually an exemplary soldier. The reason is he was in the hospital.
He was a teetotaler.
Yeah.
He was not a drinker.
To help protect it. But the point is they capture the social dynamics of the army. The other thing they do, which is really interesting, is they reverse, of course, and this is part of the way, the human drama, they reverse the pattern that you would expect, which is the aristo, played, of course, by Michael Caine, is actually subordinate to the non-aristo. Because they're both lieutenants, but the non-aristo, the sapper, the engineer, is somebody whose commission is older. Now, interestingly enough, that very device was to be used a few years later by one of the most successful comic soaps in British television history, Dad's Army, where you have exactly the same pattern. Captain Mannering, the officer, the senior person, is actually socially insecure and is of a social rank below Sergeant Wilson. And I think that is very interesting. And I think that works quite powerfully in terms of interpersonal dynamics. It might not work to the same extent today, but I think it would have worked really well in 1964. And remember, in 1964, when the British and American audiences were watching, these were people, most of whom had lived through the war, and most of whom had either directly or through listening in the pubs and whatever, conversation with veterans. So the experience of being under fire, the dynamics of it made a lot more of a difference to them, whereas today there's almost a spectator approach to it.
Thank you, Jeremy. Mr. Bangs, would you like to address any of the points that Jeremy brought up about the suspense, building up the tension, maybe how that would play against your film?
Well, speaking to that, before we move on to that point, another point that Zulu did exaggerate a bit was wit. The missionary who's a complete pacifist. In reality, he wasn't he was not a pacifist like that, and he was quite cooperative with the army. So they took a lot of liberties with that character as well, and I believe he was married. But as far as the tension, we definitely don't see that same tension throughout Gunga Din. Gunga Din really likes to let the air out quite a bit. It's quite lighthearted a lot of times. It borders on screwball comedy, especially, towards the beginning. Going back to my point about it being about entertainment. The three main characters that we see are, as we said, they're blokes, they're buddies, they're friends. And you can tell because they're constantly busting each other's balls and giving each other a hard time. And that's how you know they're friends. And they're very believable and likable.
I agree with you, but these days you have to, I think, be careful about making remarks about busting balls.
Well, it's a figurative balls. It's a figurative balls.
Figurative balls.
I didn't know how up to date you were.
Everybody has balls to bust when they're figurative like that. But as far as, it is more lighthearted. It is less about suspension and tension, but I think that they don't borrow, they really set the standard to what we see a lot now in modern action films, especially looking at like the MCU, where comedy is so important for this relief in action, but it's still capable of being very serious. And we see that embodied perfectly in Cary Grant, who is really the comic relief. He kind of insisted on taking the character of Cutter. And so that he could provide that comic relief. But at the same time, he's a tough guy. And it's completely believable in one scene for him to walk out in a temple full of deadly cultists, about 100 of them, trying just to distract them by sort of singing a song entertainedly, which is a very comic relief move. And then a moment later, throwing a punch and knocking a couple of them out. So he is simultaneously, tough, but funny too. He's basically the 30s answer to Star-Lord.
Oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Let's throw it back to Jeremy. Jeremy, if you want to bring up your next point, please.
Yeah, my next point is the quality of the protagonists. I mean, I think some of the other actors are very good. I think I agree entirely, by the way, about Whit. Whit was also considerably younger than Jack Hawkins' portrayal. I think Hawkins is very good at the portrayal of Whit that is created for him by the scriptwriter, and in a way, it helps to pose at the outcome the debate which you get, or the discussion you get at the very end between the two officers when they're discussing their experience of first combat, which is the nature of war. So I think in a way, although wit is misrepresented historically, there is in some respects theatrically or in plot terms quite a strong element there. But I'd like to focus not on Hawkins, though I think he does his role very, very well. And of course, ironically so, because Hawkins had so often played the military sort of, chisel-browed figure who was resolute. And in fact, for much of the audience, that's exactly what they would have known. So the trigger of him playing something different would have been interesting. I want to instead talk about the two protagonists, of whom one of them was obviously, it was his first really major role, which was Michael Caine, playing in a sense against how he is usually visualized from the 60s, most particularly his later success with Alfie. So playing it as an officer, and in a way, an officer who is interesting psychologically because he's encumbered in a sense by his family background. He's encumbered by his military background. He's encumbered of great success. He's encumbered by the social expectations that he knows as a line officer he is supposed to live up to. And he doesn't know whether he's going to be up to the role. I mean, this is his first experience in combat. And he, like Stanley Baker as Lieutenant Chard, who also doesn't know he's going to be up to it, and to be frank, would have been less likely to have a role, as he makes clear. He's there to build a bridge, not to take part in combat. And both of them, I think, are really interesting precisely because, and I think your comment, my colleague's comment about Cary Grant here is interesting, because they are playing characters who, in a way, are complex. That, in a sense, a lot of stupid people, when they're talking about war films, assume that war films are just people blazing away at each other with ordnance and that the characters are two-dimensional. I'm afraid to say that, as with so many comments made about certain genres of film, just shows their total ignorance. But nevertheless, that is a very strong assumption out there. Those of us who watch war films will know that the psychology, whether we agree or not with the portrayal of how people would have thought in 1939 thought in 1879 or 1880, which is a different matter entirely. I can talk about that if you're interested. But the psychology helps to make it interesting, and both of the actors rise to the parts. I mean, I think the interchange between the two of them, the way that Bloomfield, the Caine character, rescues Chard, and that way in which Chard comes also to feel that he can rely on him when he tells him to gather together a bayonet squad, for which is the harder edge of the combat. I think that's impressive. So I think it captures the human bond of combat, of shared purpose, which is more than just trying to save yourself. It's actually a sense of the responsibility. Others have ran away. We are not going to run away. This is the 300 at Thermopylae, as it were. So I think it captures that beautifully. Or if you want to use another term, the Nelsonian band of brothers. I think it captures that beautifully. But even if you put that to one side, these are two very fine portrayals of characters developing during a brief period of time under great pressure and showing potential in that. And the other character that's really true of course, is Hook. Now, I agree, Hook was totally misrepresented in the script, but he is portrayed as somebody who develops, who rises to the occasion, and that's very interesting. And of course, Wit is the exact counterpart to that, the exact contrast, because he doesn't rise to the occasion. He just turns to alcoholism, abuse, and sort of a kind of rather sort of silly, wokish deriding of everybody that doesn't share his values.
Well, I'd like to counter by...
Oh, please, go right ahead, Mr.
The characters in Gunga Din also have, a great dynamic. You don't get the moment in Gunga Din that you do get in Zulu. There's no questioning the nature of war. They don't really question their purposes at all in Gunga Din. They are, in their minds, men, and that means they are to serve their country and be brave, and if necessary, die if they have to. That's the nature of war. In that would be like Rudyard Kipling's opinion. And we see that in the character of Gunga Din himself, who longs to be a soldier in the army. He's a water bearer there, but he longs for honor. He longs to serve along with these people that he looks up to. But we also see it in our three other protagonists. One of them, Ballantine, is played by Douglas Fairbanks Jr., an actual war hero, we should say.
That's true. Stipulate for the record.
Very decorated, received a Silver Star. He basically helped come up with, I think they were called the Beach Hoppers. They basically created diversionary tactics during World War II for landings and invasions. And if it weren't for Douglas Fairbanks Jr., we could all be eating sauerkraut and listening to the Glockenspiel right now, for all that we know. So thank you, Douglas Fairbanks Jr.
That's what I'm doing right now. I don't know about you guys.
We're going to dedicate this episode to Douglas Fairbanks.
And his character is, he's about to leave the service to go get married. And this is seen by his two counterparts as a complete betrayal, not just of them, but of himself. They understand that he's changing himself for this woman. He's going to do something that they consider basically cowardly, running away. And it turns out deep down, he considers it cowardly and running away too. And so I think there's the purpose and nature of war seen in Gunga Din. I don't think there's any, I wouldn't say that Zulu has doubt in it. But I think there's a sense of duty that's shown just as much in Gunga Din.
I agree.
As much so.
And of course, particularly with Din's duty being particularly impressive, because in a way, he is the ultimate hero there.
Yes.
I think that's very important. Now, as you will know, Indian nationalists have completely rewritten their history. But as you will know, that essentially the British Empire in India rested on cooperation with people. They simply could not have held down that area if there hadn't been lots of cooperation. And in a sense, making Gunga Din the hero is, I think, a very powerful message. And the playing of the bugle, the idea of him being made an honorary corporal, I think that's all very important in creating a new form of comradeship other than the one outlined at the beginning.
And of course, Gunga Din is made in a time where British rule still exists in India.
Oh, yes, yeah.
No, that's a good point. And that's something I read in a history book. I forget who wrote it, talking about the cooperation of the locals with the British Empire, like the East India Company being made up largely of Indians, for one example.
Yes.
Who wrote that book?
Yeah, it might have been
Dr. Seuss. It was Dr. Seuss.
Could have been Neil Ferguson, maybe.
Yes, it was Neil Ferguson.
That's it was the Ferguson book. That's right. All right, Jeremy. So speaking of ball busting, we'll move on from that. And if you'd like to bring up another point for Zulu.
Yes, I mean, I actually thought there was one moment when it didn't quite work. The cinematic, the flow of the photography when they move from light to darkness on the evening of the first day. They suddenly switch from light to darkness, which, I've been to the tropics, that sort of thing does happen, but I don't think they got it to work. But on the whole, I thought the camera work was fantastic. I thought they captured very well the idea of an encircled position. I thought there were lots of absolutely gorgeous shots of the South African, the veldt with the clouds on top of the mountains in the distance. I thought that was beautiful. And I think it's actually a very well-made film. And on top of that, and here's a James Bond link, of course, the music. Barry, the person who does a lot of the early James Bond music, also does the Zulu music, and I think that's good. So I would like to say, and again, I'm not criticizing Gunga Din here, but Gunga Din had, as my colleague says, the limitations of being black and white. But I do think that as a color film, of these sort of Technicolor 1960s films, the great blockbuster films, I think it was a great success. And I'll add one other thing to that. The war film that possibly it would most be compared with of that period, because it's about a preponderantly British episode, though less exclusively British, is Lawrence of Arabia. Okay, I mean, obviously there are many other good war films, The Longest Day, for example, but The Longest Day is about the Americans as well as the Brits. Now, Lawrence of Arabia was famously, famous director, all the rest of it. Actually, I think Lawrence of Arabia has a lot of longueurs in it. It's not as tight as Zulu. And I think in many senses, although Lawrence of Arabia has some famous and excellent tracking shots, as in the attack on Aqaba and so on, I actually think Zulu is a better shot film for the plot which it is trying to hold the audience attention to.
All right, let's kick that to you, Mr. Bangs. Obviously, we're looking at a movie, in your case, from 1939. There are going to be technical limitations, but were there things they were able to do here that you think can rise up to what we saw in Zulu?
Well, I'd hardly call them, I don't consider it limitations. Black and white films are gorgeous. I think the contrast in them is great. And we're talking about one that is especially excellent here. The cinematography was done by Joseph H. August. It was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Cinematography, black and white, that year. And it went up against some stiff competition, Wuthering Heights, which ended up winning it. Of course, Stagecoach. But I think we see a lot, in black and white films, especially of the 30s and 40s. I'm always blown away by how crisp and sharp they look, especially compared to the dark, muddled, Zack Snyder helmed films that we watch today. Gunga Din is incredibly clean and crisp. Its production value is excellent. It's largely filmed in California. And, some of the cast have said that, actual people from India refuse to believe they didn't film it in Khyber Pass itself, because it was just, that believable. The backdrops are great, especially the one they used for the chasm with the suspension bridge, with the scene with the elephant, is a great scene. And this is RKO Radio Pictures, right? I mean, these guys are the best at adventure films. And so they have just tremendous set pieces that I don't think we get to see in Zulu as much. And the Zulu's accurate, obviously, but it's, it's largely, I don't know what that little chapel is made of, but it's not grandiose. Like the Golden Temple that we see in Gunga Din is grandiose. It's when you imagine going off on a far adventure to India, that's what you want to see, that big temple with the statue of Kali and everything in it. It's absolutely gorgeous. And this was the most expensive film RKO had produced up to that date. It was just about $2 million. And that's remarkable if you consider the big budget films they did, like She, and of course there's King Kong, a little one I don't know if you
just a little
have heard of
there. Yeah.
And fun fact, the gong in the title sequence of Gunga Din, that's the gong they used in King Kong.
King Kong's gong.
That's Kong's gong.
Kong's gong. Yay.
All right. Well, thank you. So, Jeremy, are there any other points you'd like to bring up for your case for Zulu?
Yes, I think there is an impressive quality for a war film when it has a large cast. And obviously because it was shot in South Africa, they had over 1,000, if you're looking at both Film Unit 1 and Film Unit 2, they had over 1,200 Zulus taking part. I think that was impressive. It's not as many as 4,000, but that was impressive. And I think that does help, just as, the 1970 Waterloo is impressive because it has so many Soviet units in it to provide the manpower for the battle scenes. So I do think that as an example of a war film, it is very good. I think that you get critics at the time and since have attacked it for being pro-imperial. I think that's ridiculous. If you listen to the script, the screenplay, it was written by John Preble, who of course made the Culloden film, who was no exponent, no supporter of British military history. There is references to us being in somebody else's country. There is no real support for empire, which is ironic because in 1879, the Zulu advance or threat to Natal would not have been seen in that way so widely. There is reference at the end to it being by both officers being a sort of slaughterhouse, and not in any sense of euphoria or glee. So I think that some of the criticism got it wrong in terms of the message it's trying to portray. But if you put that completely aside and just look at it as a battle film, it captures really close quarter fighting. It captures unit cohesion on both sides, Zulus as well as the British forces. It begins with that scene of Islandwana to give it a context, and that's a context which isn't glorious for the British at all, but I think is one that helps to locate it successfully. So I was impressed. I thought it was a very good battle film. And I think also it's more mature as a film about the experience of men under close combat fire against serious odds than many other films are.
All right. Would you like to rest your case there, Mr. Black?
I would happily do so.
All right. So, Mr. Maynard Bangs, you may present your first piece of evidence in favor of Gunga Din.
Easy for you to say, huh?
Clearly, right? My goodness.
I would like to say, if it doesn't hurt my case too much, a few more complimentary things about Zulu, as were mentioned, is yes, it used actual Zulu people in its production, which is great. And I think all the animals that were using it were donated to the Zulu people. And another interesting thing, of course, this is, for people who don't know much about Zulu history, this takes place about 50 years after the end of Shaka Zulu's reign. So, the leader at this time is, I can't say it right, Setshwayo. And his actual great-grandson plays him in the film. And his great-grandson would go on to a career in politics. But back on to Gunga Din and the topic of imperialism. Obviously, Gunga Din's going to have a sort of pro-imperial slant as it was written by Rudyard Kipling. And anyone who knows anything about Kipling he's very pro-imperialist. He's very pro-colonialism. But I think that if you focus on just the film itself, we're seeing, a really heroic portrayal painted of Gunga Din, who is going well beyond the call of duty. He is simply supposed to be a water bearer, which is, akin to a medic. I mean, water bearers save lives. We even see water bearers in Zulu, that are very important in that battle to keeping it going. Yeah. And often, as the poem too, that Gunga Din, there is a poem, is based on, Gunga Din is explained to be an extremely heroic water bearer who would run right into danger to bring people water when they would need it the most. Some last things I want to touch on, though, before I rest my case, because a lot of it I brought in along the way. I would like to remind you, I think the cast is phenomenal. Fairbanks, as we mentioned, is, actual war hero. Cary Grant is very charming as this sort of tough yet funny individual. And then
kind of playing himself
a bit. I know he could take a chair shot to the head. Rumor was, and then you have Victor McLaughlin, I think McLaughlin. It's a hard name to say.
It is a hard name to pronounce. I wouldn't even try.
Yeah, exactly. And he's the glue that holds those three guys together. You absolutely believe them being friends. Beside even in just the beginning where they're being chewed out, at the beginning of the film, Cary Grant has gotten them in trouble because he's bought a treasure map, and it has gotten all three of them in trouble. And when they're getting chewed out for it, Grant takes blame for it. I bought the map, and the commanding officer doesn't believe him, and it's like, look at you trying to take the blame for your buddies, and you let him. And so his buddies get in even more trouble. So it's definitely a story of friends. It's a story of adventure too. And unlike in Zulu, where I don't, the Zulu people are defending their land, in Gunga Din, there's really no doubt that the thuggies are bad people. Now, the thugs were not nearly as organized as this film suggests. I know there's some contemporary issues, whether they existed at all, or whether they were just a British imperialist ghost story or not. But certainly they weren't particularly organized. They were just a group of highwaymen. Their killing was not religiously oriented really at all. They killed for profit. And that is largely what they are. But there's no denying that they're bad guys. You can ask Indiana Jones that if you don't believe him.
And you look wonderfully the part on that.
Yes.
Yes. I don't think the listeners can see the part.
I'll post pictures of how wonderful I look.
Right.
As he does every week.
Yes, of course. And so that's largely what I want to talk about is, Gunga Din, it's an adventure film. It is focused on entertainment. It can make you laugh, but it has pathos too, right? I mean, the scene where Gunga Din and Cary Grant are both bayoneted.
Yeah, I know.
Bayonets the audience in the heart. I was like, no, they're not going to kill Cary Grant and Gunga Din. Not all at once. And then in his final breath, Gunga Din climbs the top of this tower with a bugle and charges the warning cry. And then, of course, we get a great, big, tremendous battle in the end, where I'd like to remind you, elephants bring in Gatling guns on their backs.
That is true.
Elephants with Gatling guns. And with that, I'll rest my case.
I can't think of a better point to rest on than elephants with Gatling guns. Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Jeremy, you may begin.
Zulu, a great film, brilliantly acted, one of the best war films in the sense that it captures the immediacy of combat. It captures what happens to men thrown together in a really difficult circumstance, outnumbered, doing their duty. It captures the ethos on both sides. It's sympathetic to the Zulus. The Zulus emerge not as some sort of horde, but as having very careful tactics which are fully explained and having a purpose of their own. These are not, for example, presented as, Germans who are motivated by harsh ideology. And I think ultimately it is a film that grips you. This is a film in which you watch it, it's 139 minutes, and there isn't a single moment when you do not want to find out what is going to happen next, even when you know what the outcome of the film is. And that, to me, is a real classic of filmmaking.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Mr. Maynard Bangs, you may present your closing argument.
Your Honor, gentlemen, the jury, in lieu of my closing argument, I'd like to instead read you a poem written by literary icon Maynard Bangs.
Uh-oh.
Highly unusual, but we'll allow it.
The poem...
Copy your lines.
The poem is entitled Gunga Din. Out in India's scorching rays, when I spent my wretched days serving Her Royal Majesty, the Queen. Of all our stout, bald-headed crew, the finest man I ever knew was our faithful sake bearer, Gunga Din. He was one so truly loyal, though his pedigree not royal, he still never knew the meaning of retreat. In the heated midst of battle, his courage never rattled as he slung the men a fermented rice wine treat. This goes on for about another 6 or so pages, so I'm going to just cut to the ending here and get us to the point.
Very good.
A modern Homer.
As he slowly knelt beside me with some sake to provide me, an evil, thuggy cultist came and choked. With the kerchief round his clenched throat, Gunga Ben said, and I can quote, "Final Fantasy wasn't guilty." Then he croaked. Yes, Ben, the bravest sake bearer, Gunga Ben. Now I know you're up above me, and deep down you truly love me. You're a better dude than I am, Gunga Ben. Thank you. Gentlemen of the jury, in honor of the courageous sacrifice shown by Gunga Ben, I hope you find in your hearts to find the verdict in favor of my client.
A tear, true hero.
The audience can't see this, but the look on Ben's face the whole time was, where is this going? Where is this going?
He was just bracing for that punchline right to the gut. Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, or should I say Mr. Gunga Ben, and Mr. He Travels the Fastest Who Travels Alone, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine which film is the superior movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
I demand justice for Annie the elephant. Justice for Annie the elephant.
Oh, Annie.
Love this case a lot more than I thought I would. When I watched these two films, I was like, well, I mean, they're both British, but other than that, like, what's the continuity between these things? And they really did combine these two cases together into a kind of a cohesive narrative, combining those 2 points. So yeah, I was surprised by that. I really like these head-to-heads.
Yeah, I did too. You know what it reminded me? It was like a joint lecture, like Jeremy and Rob bouncing back and forth, both bringing up really good points, not really tearing down the other movie, but kind of building on what the other was saying. So I did enjoy the case a lot, just aesthetically, you know, like I like the way it played out.
Yeah, it's a good case, but you know, these movies are not for me. I don't think that would surprise anybody.
I'm shocked.
Definitely I'm the woke one of the group. That
I am so shocked.
But I can appreciate like the technical skill and like the sense of production value. But it's a similar issue for me with like Westerns, where it's like cowboys versus Native Americans, and I'm never rooting for the cowboys. Yet the cowboys are who they're about, so I kind of have to just like suck it up and watch them.
Right.
But I would say that like both of these movies are definitely like 3-star movies at least. Like if we're going out of 5. But Zulu is very sober. It's very matter of fact. Gunga Din is very goofy and distorted, but ultimately it's made so confidently that it kind of ends up a draw. So I don't know which way I'm leaning on this one. I think they're pretty much equal.
There's 2 flaws that each one has like one big flaw in my mind when comparing the two, because a lot of them like do have like good characterizations on both sides, good photography on both sides. The problem for Gunga Din for me is the pacing. It doesn't have that North Star as far as like what you care about. It just like takes complete detours as, you know, we're in a party spike and punch for some reason. Whereas in Zulu, like there's this opening kind of shot in the war where like these British soldiers are just gunning down these practically unarmed Zulu people. And I can't, like at that moment, I'm like, I know whose side I'm on. It's on the side of these people who are just defending their homeland. It was kind of hard for me after that to like be on the side of, you know, the British troops.
Yeah, it's like somebody coming into your home randomly starts shooting at you, but they have a queen. I have to surrender. They have a queen.
I'm sure they were heroic. Like, I'm sure some people just like found themselves there in this situation and like, okay, I have to get out. So like from that aspect, Zulu kind of did it, but Gunga Din sidestepped that whole issue pretty well by just making it sort of an adventure film. And the thuggies are just like, you know, one band of aggressors that are pretty evil. So
yeah, I will say that in watching Gunga Din, suddenly Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom makes much more sense.
It does. It so does.
That's a good point.
George Lucas owes a lot. I did not realize how much was just like directly lifted from that.
Like there, you could tell that like Lucas and Spielberg were watching this movie and go, we don't need to update anything, right? Like this is totally cool. We can do this now.
It is, and it really is. Like the photography though, like I love that shot of like the thuggy cult leader just like sitting there in the black and white pedestal there. Man, great photography in that film. Zulu had great photography too, though, with the encompassing shots. It kind of reminded me of Seven Samurai a bit, where they're all like enclosed and all these people.
Yeah, I got that, and I got Rio Bravo a lot.
Yeah, some Rio Bravo vibes in there too. You know, and one of the things, you know, like I want to be sensitive to like what Ryan was saying, you know, but the thing is with these kind of movies, when you're talking about the British Empire is like, it did happen, you know, and sometimes you have to ask these hard questions, but you have to deal with the fact that it did actually happen. And sometimes the answers, you know, are weird. So it's not like we could just say, well, the British Empire shouldn't have done these things, because they did, you know, and the situation that these soldiers found them in was pretty harrowing, even if we think, well, they shouldn't have been there, but they were, you know. And when you look at the legacy of the British Empire, there's more and more tough questions that come up that you have to answer too. It's like, were some of these people better under Empire, or was the legacy of the Empire better for them after the fact? You know, when you look at India, there's a lot of corruption in India, you know, and then you look at how Hong Kong, which was under British imperial rule much longer, seemed to have a better track record, you know. So these are complicated questions. Or Canada, that's a good point too. These are complicated questions that I think movies like Zulu kind of make you think about a bit more, and they force you to go deeper. They force you to do a little more research, you know, so you're not just being too flippant, just like casting it off. Where I think Gunga Din lends itself to be cast off a bit more flippantly because it has the cloak of being an adventure movie. So I think that, so I'm not saying that to knock Gunga Din. I think it was going in a different sort of sidestep positions. Yeah, exactly. I think it was. I think they wanted to focus on the adventure story, which I really liked. Like, Ben, you said you didn't like the pacing. I kind of liked the pacing. I liked what Maynard said about it, letting the air out. Like, it built up the tension. It's like, hey, the town isn't responding with the telegram. So they go out there. There's that first action scene, and then they come back from it, and we get to really live and breathe with these three gentlemen and see how their friendship unfolds, which really make the stakes quite raised at the end, because you do care about if they live or die. And in Zulu, I kind of was thinking, like, any one of these guys can die, and I wouldn't be affected the same. Like, if Michael Caine died, that wouldn't have affected me the same way. If Cary Grant died in Gunga Din. I know I would
say that about Michael Caine. He's a good person, but you're talking about Michael Caine, the actor, not the character.
yeah. I thought, well, you know, his character in that. So I think that's, so I do like where both of these films are coming from. I know it seems like we're all really 50-50 on this. Who's going to be brave enough to plant the flag, as it were?
I will. I'll go and say.
Both of you. Okay, never mind then.
I'm going with Gunga Din, just because I like the adventure. I do like how it's sort of like, I think cinematically it sort of sets up a lot of things for films that came later. So there's a lot of, you know, road building there that I like seeing, especially for Temple of Doom. But I think just in general, like I know like Rian Johnson like has people watch this film and has been admitted into the archives as being culturally significant. And I sort of see that in this film. So from that aspect, I'm going Gunga Din.
All right, Ryan, you seem ready to be locked in as well. What do you got?
Yeah, I appreciate Gunga Din on the technical level and its influence, but I gotta go, I guess, Zulu, because they actually treat the Zulus with actually like humanity. Like, they're not just faceless enemies. You get the clear impression that whoever made the movie thinks that they were good strategizers, that it wasn't this completely one-sided thing. And so I was surprised because I was expecting to like Zulu the least out of the two, but I think that ultimately gets the edge for me. So Zulu.
Yeah, I think the one word you used to describe it, Ryan, which ties it all together, was sober. You know, like, it is a very, it takes itself seriously, you know, and that's really good. And what's a surprise twist to me, I'm going with Gunga Din as well. I just... I liked the adventure. I liked Cary Grant. I like everything that Zulu brings to the table. Don't get me wrong. I think they're both great movies, but if I put them side by side, I'm excited to watch Gunga Din again. And so that I think that's what we're going with.
All right. I'm kind of glad it was a split vote too.
No one wants to say Dylan's handsome. Come on.
It's so paid.
Mr. Haslar, has the jury reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of Zulu versus Gunga Din, we find in favor of Gunga Din.
Crazy.
Very well. The verdict is so rendered. I hereby order that Gunga Din be posthumously awarded the Academy Award for Best Picture and a stirring poem about the movie be written. Court is adjourned.
Well, they did write a poem. It's called Gunga Ben.
That's true.
This is Amanda Hug and Kiss of the Gabagool Gazette reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Jeremy Black, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
I think that was an entirely reasonable verdict, two very good films, but I would still urge people, whilst respecting the jury, to still have another look at Zulu. It is a great film, and I think your juror who made the comment about it also giving the Zulu point of view is, I think, absolutely right. This was a more mature film about imperialism, a much more mature film than Gunga Din. So, well done to my colleague for winning his case, but I'm afraid to say I still think Zulu is the better film.
Thank you. That juror sounds very smart. And here comes Maynard Bangs. Excuse me, could we get a word on how you feel about today's verdict?
Shocked, because I really came in expecting to lose for a lot of the reasons that the jury and my opposing counsel mentioned. I also think Zulu is the better movie. I think people should watch both. But I of the two, I would certainly be watching Zulu again. So very, very surprised. I'm glad the jury agreed with what I had to say. I worked hard on the case. But shocked certainly is the term.
Thank you very much. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis.
Wow, I did. You know what really helped the case? We didn't bring up the brown face.
It really did.
That's right.
They were trying to get Sabu, who was an Indian actor, very big at that time, to play the part. And I think if he had, that would have helped a lot.
Absolutely.
In my view of it. I did actually read the New York Times articles of it. They were negotiating with him, but RKO was unwilling to give up Ginger Rogers in exchange, because they had contracts at the time. So I'm sure studio contracts are really what prevented that from happening. But that really would have helped the film a lot if we had cast that. But
Ginger Rogers would have made a great Gunga Din.
she would have been fantastic. But let's jump off this topic. But Jeremy, what has been keeping you busy lately? What have you been doing?
Well, I've been working, alas. I mean, I've retired. When I say alas, it keeps my mind going. And I bring out these books which I find interesting, and ultimately I think and I hope they're important. What have I been doing? I've been trying not to get frustrated doing copy editing and proofs, which I loathe, partly because you realize your own mistakes, which are irritating, but partly because copy editors can be really sort of, they try and, as it were, rewrite it in their terms when it's your authorial voice that you want. So I'm currently, I was actually discussing at lunch with a friend whether to just pull a book and put it for free on the internet, because I was so irritated with the copy editor of a particular book. But I'm doing a couple of books at the moment. I'm doing a historical atlas of Britain for British Library books. I'm doing my series of national histories. So I've got France has just come out. I've got Germany coming. I've got the Caribbean coming. I mean, these are done and in the works. The same with the Atlantic. And I'm currently doing the Pacific. So I was reading an article this afternoon about the Maori extinction of the moa, which were giant flightless birds, which
Terror birds
largely ate. 28 species of flightless birds were destroyed between the 14th century and the 18th century. And the author, who's a New Zealand Maori anthropologist, was doing very interesting stuff as to whether this led to the Maori having a sense that they themselves were going to run out of food and that their society would collapse. And I found that interesting. And what people don't realize is when you write a general book, which is what I do a lot these days, actually it is based on a lot of research. It's just you don't need, or you shouldn't need, to show the research. And one of the things that's characteristic of the immaturity of so many academics, particularly historians, is they often feel they have to show you their footnotes in order to gain credibility, which, you know, may well be what junior academics feel they have to do to get a job or to get promotion. But actually, really, if you've only got so much space, you should be engaging with the audience in the text, and, you know, the footnotes should be subsumed into your work, as it were. So I was finding that quite interesting, and I'm going to be writing a section this evening on the different purposes of imperial expansion in the Pacific in the 19th century. So there you go.
Oh, Jeremy, you're always doing something. And hey,
well, what else does a chap do on Sunday evening?
And one of the things about citing our...
I'm not young like you and full of life, and I'm an old...
No, you're the whippersnapper this time. I told you. But one of the things about citing sources was drilled...
Theatre of Bloods next. We should tell them that. We got two people. My idea was the Theatre of Blood, which is a brilliant Vincent Price film, and I hope people will watch it. And the other one, with the person going to do that, talk about his film.
Yes, I'll be doing The Abominable Dr. Phibes, one of the greatest cult classics of all time. Can't wait to do
an
it.
interesting head-to-head, but
that's going to be great.
But one of the
I don't see them as head-to-heads. What I see them is drawing attention to two good films.
That's the mission at the end of the day, for sure.
I think Wheels of Justice, and that's why the audience probably doesn't realize this, but most of the work goes on in picking the films, because we're trying to pick two good films. There's no point picking films in which, as it were, it's obvious which one should win, because they both should win. That's the nature of a competition like this.
But mostly Abominable Dr. Phibes. That's the one that's going to
win. There we go. We're very competitive.
To our program, apart from us, do you know?
Yes.
Oh,
yes. Many of your episodes are extremely popular.
Yeah, your episodes are very popular, Jeremy, and we appreciate it too. Every time you send them out, and people should subscribe to your newsletter, The Contrarian. Can they do that on your website?
Yeah, it's free. Nobody has to pay for it. When you say subscribe, they've just got to get in touch with me. But I don't charge for anything. As you know, none of us, I hope listeners understand this. We're all doing this pro bono because we love films and in the spirit of good fellowship. And
we actually do have to pay Ben.
Yes.
And I've been stealing the money.
I'm charged by the word. That's why I hardly say anything. Like, I'm sorry, we only get like $10 on us.
And before we roll over to recommendations, Jeremy, do you have? Did you write anything on Kipling or not? I know your library is so huge.
I've written my book, Imperial Legacies, is a really good book on empire. And I mean, I think, look, there are strengths and weaknesses of the imperial system. As you correctly say, look at the world at the present moment. What I'm concerned about is not to get into an abstract discussion about it. What I'm concerned is what I think is the trust between the generations. So in trying to make sense of what people did in the 19th century, I'm trying not to say rah for them or the opposite. I'm trying as a historian to make sense. And the point about it is people are not good, whether they're historians or journalists or novelists or diarists, if they are writing either eulogies or messages of hate. There are some episodes in history that are truly terrible. One can think of the Third Reich as a classic example. I would add, for example, in our present day and age, the North Korean dictatorship. I think it's a truly awful one. But much in the historical record is more complex than that. And, you know, in looking at the Pacific at the present moment, 19th century Pacific Islanders did badly out of Western expansionism, which includes that of the United States, of course. But be under no illusions, it was not as though societies like Hawaii had been founded as a result of people getting together in some free living democratic system. I mean, Hawaii had been unified itself, the archipelago, in the late 18th, early 19th century with a considerable amount of violence. Same in Tahiti. So, you know, in a sense, often outside imperialists were just another version of imperialism, which was the same thing that occurred in India. Anyway, that's enough from me.
Yes, no, people can read no, it's good to know that people can read more about that from you. Now, we always ask for recommendations from our guests for a movie you think people should check out. So what is a movie that you think our listeners should check out?
God, that's a very... Well, look, I know this sounds silly, but I do wonder, we've not done this before, or I haven't done this before, suggest to them to watch the film next time that we're doing. But can I add one other film, which I would like to recommend because it is so bad, it is funny, and I think we should watch...
I know this one.
I don't know that I would... And that is Dracula Meets Billy the Kid. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that film.
So it's got John Carradine, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant because, of course, Billy the Kid, I mean, it's classic, you know, Billy the Kid's girl is too much attracted by this rather sinister European that turns up in the Wild West. And Billy the Kid knows he's a baddie and can shoot him. But the point is the bullets don't kill him. And I just thought, I was stranded. I was at a conference in Bloomington, Indiana, and I was ill. So I was pushing myself too hard. In the middle of term, I'd gone for the weekend. So I had to skip the conference dinner, and it was the weekend of the Ted Turner, Weekend Mephisto came out, and the Ted Turner channel sort of celebrated by showing every single vampire film, okay? And I don't like vampire films. They frighten me to a certain extent. I don't like them. But I looked up and I saw that this one was coming on. And I thought, this sounds fun. And it is so bad, it is wonderful.
Yes, John Carradine is in that film. So
it was one of 19 movies he made that year.
Yes, almost certainly.
So, Maynard, you were opposing counsel. What's your recommendation this week?
So for my recommendation this week, I'm going to go with another film by RKO Radio Pictures that features cinematographer Joseph H. August, who as well did Gunga Din, and it's 1941's The Devil and Daniel Webster. It tells the story of a desperate American farmer who, after selling his soul to the devil, known as Mr. Scratch, to save his farm, is later brought before a jury of the damned, where he is represented by Daniel Webster, who was a noted statesman and lawyer in the 1800s, a real-life guy. It's an adaptation of the 1936 short story of the same name, which was written by Stephen Vincent Benet, and Benet actually worked on the screenplay for the film. It's an actual, this is a classic American short story. Hopefully you read it in high school. And this film is the second best adaptation of it after The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror 4's The Devil and Homer Simpson.
Naturally.
It appears it might actually, good news, Ryan, it might actually be streaming on Canopy. Support your local library. Support your local library. So our judge, Schlenzo D, what do you have for a recommendation?
Okay, so I'm glad Jeremy brought up his book Imperial Legacies, because it is a brilliant book. Go out and buy it right now. I have it on Kindle. It's fantastic, and I read it in preparation for the case. So I was happy he mentioned it, and I won't belabor the point anymore. And so my movie recommendation is I Was a Male War Bride from 1949, starring Cary Grant. Cary Grant plays a British officer who marries an American officer, and he's eligible for citizenship under the War Brides Act, even though he's a husband. And the hilarity that ensues with the bureaucracy and the ending of World War II to get him and his wife together to get to America. It is very funny. It is very charming. And after doing like the heavy movies like Zulu or Gunga Din, something like this is definitely on the light side and a lot of fun.
Oh, Gunga Din was heavy? Come on.
I mean, compared
the elephants
to...
Elephants are very heavy.
Compared to I Was a Male War Bride.
Gatling guns on them.
Very clever, Ryan. That lets you get to the next recommendation.
My recommendation is another period epic. It's Alexander Korda's 1939 production, The Four Feathers.
Oh, yeah.
I could appreciate this film purely on an aesthetic level, but because it's shot in dreamy, sumptuous Technicolor on a generous budget. But thankfully, it also functions as a meditation on courage during wartime, and it would make a killer triple bill with two other Korda productions, The Jungle Book and The Thief of Baghdad. The Four Feathers is currently streaming on both HBO Max and the Criterion Channel.
And The Thief of Baghdad, which also stars Sabu.
As does The Jungle Book.
As does The Jungle Book, you're quite right. Because Korda was the producer who had the rights to Sabu and refused to trade off to RKO because RKO wouldn't do Ginger Rogers. Small world. Big Ben, send us on home, Gunga Ben. What have you got for us?
I'm going with one of my favorite British war movies, which is Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk.
Oh my God, I called it. I was gonna recommend Dunkirk, and I went, you know what? Ben's gonna do it.
Well, I had a backup. It was gonna be Temple of Doom, if not Dunkirk.
Which would
It
also
popped
call
up on your letterbox, and I was like, this is odd. Why is he watching it now?
I was
Well, this
so
is why.
close.
And I'll admit, like on watching it on TV, like the experience is somewhat lessened. I don't know if you have to go all the way to 70 millimeter IMAX, but the bigger the screen and the louder the sound system, the better for this film. But assuming you missed it and it's not replaying anywhere, it's still decent to watch at home. For me, the aerial shots combined with the great sound mixing really shine the most. But the three narratives, which come together at the end, are also pretty engaging. It showcases Nolan's strengths, which are practical effects, which I love practical effects, and supreme attention to detail.
And it's his shortest movie by like 30 minutes.
It is.
An hour 40.
I was actually pleased by that. I was like, oh, how long is, oh, hey, that's not so bad.
I could watch it twice. And the same time it would take to watch Tenet.
Right.
Oh, God.
Can't believe it. I totally called that one. Excellent. Glad I didn't do it.
I had a backup.
Still, but it's so satisfying.
The backup was Gunga Ben. It was a movie he made up in his head.
I
Shoestring budget.
phone,
As we start to wind things down here, we'd like to remind our listeners that if you leave us an iTunes review and send us a screenshot of it on either Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook with the hashtag ROJ Reviews, you will be entered into an upcoming raffle for some really cool Reels of Justice swag.
It was
Speaking
very
of
natural
reviews-
sounding.
Oh, thank you, Rob. Speaking of reviews, here's a really nice one. This pod is a great escape from everything that's going on in the world. I disagree. Amazing quality. Very happy to subscribe from That's a Bingo. Hey, guy. Thanks a lot. Now screenshot your review and shoot it to us on social media with the hashtag ROJ Reviews and enter that raffle to get some free stuff.
What if That's a Bingo's a gal, Ryan? What
Yeah,
are you going to do then?
It's not. Girls don't care about Tarantino movies. It's not. It's not.
Canceled. Canceled.
It's literally like our fourth episode is a woman talking about Tarantino movies.
She's the exception that proves the rule.
Ooh, he might be onto something there.
And with that, we are all out of show. But we want to thank Jeremy Black for joining us. Thank you so much again, Jeremy.
My pleasure.
Yep, we're going to have you back soon, as we mentioned, for Theater of Blood and Abominable Dr. Fibes.
Which will win.
We'll see, Ryan.
The first time we've ever previewed an episode in an episode. That's exciting.
Well, we've talked about Zulu a lot before the Zulu.
We did
episode.
talk about Zulu a lot before this. This is true.
And Porky's too. So
Hey,
That
don't
was
jinx
when
it.
Neil
did that
deGrasse
one.
Tyson was on the show, and he
Yeah,
was
he already
very
did
much a
that.
fan of
No,
Porky's too.
Don't jinx it.
Yep. So we'll have Jeremy Black again, and it's going to be a great time. And we hope everyone will join us then too, as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count
Annie,
it.
Cheers.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.